The Golden State Warriors won 4 NBA titles behind their death lineup. And in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, I'll tell you about the 5 players that can replicate it for the Pels and could lead New Orleans to similar success. It's the Tuesday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Tuesday, and we've got a fun show for you where we are going to look at the Golden State Warriors and their death lineup that led them to a ton of success. And I do think New Orleans has some of the players to replicate that, maybe not to the same degree, but there is a small ball death lineup here for New Orleans that we are going to analyze today because I think it's going to win them some games. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. 2 weeks to Media Day. We're back to 5 days a week. I'm excited to be here with y'all. I hope you're excited to be here with me too, whether you're a new listener or you've been with me for a long time. I appreciate you making Locked On Pelicans part of your day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And become an everydayer, that means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. So let's get into this one because I think this is pretty fun. The Golden State Warriors had their vaunted death lineup. I'm putting that in quotes there. It was a small ball lineup that worked really well. And when you look at it, there's some archetypes of players in there. They had 2 shooters in Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, Klay being a pretty decent defender too. They also had 3 lengthy and versatile defenders in Andre Iguodala. It was then first Harrison Barnes, then Kevin Durant. And then you had kind of the do-it-all guy that was your center, even though he was shorter, smaller, in Draymond Green. That lineup had shooting, they had slashers, scores at every single position. Green was the weak link offensively, but could pass the ball really effectively. And defensively, and this is the key part, because we'll talk about this more in the next segment here, they didn't allow people into the paint. There was no rim protector in that lineup. There's no rim protector really on the New Orleans Pelicans here. And they just didn't allow people to get into the paint, and it was fine. And the Pelicans have players that fit that prototype. And here's the small ball lineup. You have DeJounte Murray, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson. You can slot them in at whatever position you want. It doesn't really matter. It's those 5 guys. I want to go through this offensively in this segment, defensively in the next segment too, and then kind of look at some of the bigger questions around this lineup and some of the subs and things like that. The Pelicans have players that really do fit that prototype with that 5-man lineup. And let's start with Zion because he's going to be an obvious in here, right? The scorer and slasher and cutter and the guy that makes opponents worried about the interior. That Warriors lineup had guys that could all play on the perimeter. So I don't know, just take people out of the paint, go throw them on the guys in the perimeter. You don't need to worry kind of, except they could all attack the basket for the most part, even Steph. Zion puts immense pressure on the rim, draws double teams in a way that almost no one else does in the league. That's going to open things up for everybody else. So you have Zion kind of doing all of that. Then offensively, you have Herb Jones kind of as the Andre Iguodala guy, the do-it-all, well-rounded offensive guy. You need him to shoot threes. He can do that. Herb improved at that tremendously last year. One of the better shooters from the corners in the league. He can facilitate the ball. He can cut. He can drive. Whatever you kind of need him to do, he can kind of do without being the strongest guy at any of those areas out there on the court. DeJounte Murray is kind of Klay Thompson-like in terms of facilitating the offense a little bit, being a competent 3-point shooter, if not elite or as elite, as say Steph Curry was. But he can shoot the 3 ball. He can organize the offense. He can attack. He's got good size too, like Klay Thompson does. Trey Murphy is your Steph Curry in this lineup as the deep shooter who will just bomb away. But but can put it on the floor and attack a hard closeout and make the right kind of thing. We'll talk more about Trey in the next segment because to make this lineup really work and be unlocked, I think he needs to improve in a couple of different areas. Offensively, he needs more of an in-between game, maybe a little bit more passing too. He can shoot the three. He's a deep three-point shooter too, and that's really important to a lineup like this. But once he puts the ball on the court, if he attacks a closeout, he's going to the rim. And if you kind of get in his way, that's where it falls apart a little bit. So adding a little bit more passing to him, a move to get around a guy on his way to the rim rather than just simply trying to dunk over him, even if it's like from 4 or 5 feet away, it would go a long way towards helping him in all of this. And then that leaves Brandon Ingram. And I was thinking about this for a while the past couple days as I was planning this show out, figuring out his role on offense. He could be a shooter. He doesn't try to be. A mid-range guy in this is going to actively hurt you and the spacing on all of this. But I do kind of see him as the Draymond Green guy on offense. Green's role offensively with that depth lineup was to be the facilitator. People forget how good of a passer and facilitator Draymond Green is. And when you look at his numbers, this is a guy who's averaged for his career almost 6 assists per game. During those title runs, when he was elite, he was averaging over 7 assists per game. He has a season in 2020, 2021 where he averaged 8.9 assists. Those are really, really good numbers. So Ingram is, teams dared Green to shoot threes. Either he would miss or he just wouldn't take him at all, and that could hurt that lineup. But he passed well, and that's really needed in this sort of lineup. Ingram can do the passing. We talked about yesterday how he's an underrated passer, I think. Reads angles really well, can find his teammates and use his length to see over the top of defenders that allows him to make some of those passes or know where he needs to send the ball. He fills that Draymond Green role really well in terms of the passing, but here's the thing that can elevate this. Ingram can shoot. He can shoot. He chooses not to, but overall, he's a pretty good shooter from three. Last season was 36% from three. The year before that was 39%. His first 2 years in New Orleans was 39% and then 38% from three. For his career in New Orleans, he's a 37.2% shooter from deep. That's a good number. It can even be higher, I think, but that's a good number. If he can be near 40%, 37, 38, 39%, that works here. And he's going to get open threes in this lineup. And if he decides to take them, he can be a shooter that elevates it. Then you have, Trey, who's going to be your shooter. Ingram, who can shoot and do it on volume. Herb's going to just make his threes depending on the amount that he takes, no matter the amount that he takes. And Murray's going to launch threes too. That's 4 guys that are willing to shoot threes around Zion Williamson. You want to double Zion inside? Someone's going to be open. You want to play the perimeter guys one-on-one and take them away? Zion's going to be one-on-one and not have a guy able to rotate over and defend him at the rim. It's a really great lineup offensively that will blitz teams. There's enough athleticism in there that if you run a traditional big, they're going to run you off the court. It should work really well, and those are the 5 guys and kind of the roles that they play, with Ingram being the weirdest one in there, but you put him in because it's Brandon Ingram and he can score, and with the three-point shooting, if he shoots those threes in that lineup, it'll work. Look, if they sag off of him thinking he's not going to take threes and he starts taking them, that's going to pull defenders out of the paint, sagging off of him really, really quickly. That lineup works and is scary. And I even tweeted out recently, I think that's maybe their starting lineup. It feels like if you run a center there, well, let's talk about that in the third segment. Let's look at it defensively. We know the offensive chops that group's going to have. That should be really, really good and really, really effective scoring. But can they defend? Can they rebound? Those are the things I want to look at coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, because I do think it hinges on 2 guys. Draymond Green was one of the keys, maybe the biggest key to making that Warriors death lineup works. Who do you think is the Draymond Green defensively for that lineup? I'll tell you who I think it is coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Gametime. This is my go-to ticketing app, whether it's Saints games, and I had a couple friends on the road to go watch the Cowboys at AT&T Stadium. I sent them to Gametime. They got their tickets for $20 cheaper because of it. For Pelicans games, but beyond just sporting events, whether it's comedy, theater, concerts, more, Gametime is my go-to ticketing app for a variety of reasons. And what I love is the all-in pricing. You can toggle this up front and it shows you the total up front, so there's no surprise fees at checkout. I also love the seat views. If you're going to a place you've never been, traveling with the team on the road, and you want to get the seats that you want, you can see the view from your seat in the app before you buy. Then always the Gametime guarantee, which means it's a great time to buy anytime, because Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find tickets in the same section and row for less. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For the rest of the week, for the everydayers, here's what you got to look forward to. Tomorrow, we're going to look at the defense and how they're going to be even better and what it's going to mean for the team overall. Thursday, we're looking at 3 wild things that could happen. I got some things that I think are like very realistic possibilities that are like big surprises and you might not see coming, and I'll explain those in Thursday's show. Then Friday, what about award winners for the Pelicans? There was an MVP debate breaking out around Jason Tatum, but I think some of it applies to the Pelicans too. So that's the remainder of the week here for the everydayers of Locked On Pelicans. Now for your second listen today, Locked On NBA, no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national experts and local experts in 30 minutes or less. Available on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's get into the defensive side of the ball of this death lineup. The offensive side we know should be good. That's a lot of firepower there, the right pieces to make it work, and it kind of is modeled off of the Golden State Warriors death lineup. But what about defensively for DeJounte Murray, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, and Zion Williamson? What made that death lineup work so effectively for the Golden State Warriors was the defense. They were really, really good on that side of the ball with it. With Draymond Green being able to guard opposing centers being kind of the key to that sort of thing. But almost everyone other than Steph was like an above average to really good defender. Iguodala was an elite defender too. Harrison Barnes was good enough and had really good size and length and athleticism. Same for Kevin Durant. He's a very good defender. Klay Thompson's been underrated at that point in his career for his defense. The only weak link that you would call it that is Steph Curry. So you had 4 like good to elite defenders out there on the court. Does New Orleans really have that? And I think this is where things are a little bit weaker for New Orleans, but I do think it still works. Murray is going to have a bounce back year as a defender. It kind of went away in Atlanta, but that I think is the situation there and was a disaster. He's going to be, I think, an elite defender again this year. Herb Jones we can just leave it at that. You know, Ingram and Zion had their best defensive seasons, in my opinion, this past season, but I think that's okay. And even if even the death lineup had a weak defender in Steph, so I wouldn't call Zion or Ingram bad defenders. I would not call them good to elite, but above average, yes. The wild card to maybe making this work is Trey Murphy. You know, if he steps forward on defense, this could be a pretty special unit. Herb Jones and DeJounte Murray are 2 of the best at forcing turnovers, and that's important with this group. If Trey can get in there too and use his size to establish himself as an elite defender to not get beaten on that side of the ball, because that happened a lot last year, the past couple of years, right? I think we give him, one of the things I've noticed, and this is a slight aside, is like when a guy's taller, they're athletic, and you don't really know what to say, it's often like, well, he's a good defender. You saw that with kind of Lonzo Ball when maybe he wasn't as good of a defender as his reputation indicated. You know, Trey's not there. I do think he's been bad defensively. at times. But if he steps forward on the defensive side of the ball, that really solidifies this unit. One of the things that they are going to do is switch. And that's what made the Warriors' death lineup work. Defensively, they switched. There was no rim protection there whatsoever with the Warriors' death lineup. None. Draymond Green has never been a shot blocker. His block percentage is very, very low. What they did was just not let defenders or offensive players into the paint. Similar to the Pelicans defense the past couple of years here, which is ranked as a top 7-6-5 unit the past couple of seasons. They just don't let people get into the paint, and therefore you don't need to worry about scoring at the rim by just denying them. That's what that lineup for Golden State did. There's no reason that the Pelicans can't continue to do that here. So while we'd like there to be more rim protection, never a bad thing to have that, I don't know if it's like the most needed thing. But Trey has been at times leaky on defense, guys getting by him, and this whole thing falls apart if guys are getting at the rim and just scoring very, very easily. So if Trey steps forward and kind of gets closer to Herb Jones and DeJounte Murray with his defensive ability, and his size is going to really allow him to do that, this unit can be pretty fearsome. And the way they get fearsome defensively is by forcing turnovers. For the everydayers, we went over yesterday how the Pelicans didn't run too much. This lineup is their opportunity to do so. With Herb and Murray out there forcing turnovers, getting out and running, and now you throw Trey Murphy into the mix trying to do that as well, that's going to be a really pretty fearsome group. Zion did a pretty good job of forcing steals down low. All of those things I think can really make this unit great. So it does rely a little bit on Trey Murphy stepping forward. Now, what about Herb Jones on the defensive side of the ball? Draymond Green guarded opposing centers for the Golden State Warriors in this sort of lineup because, normally a big center should be able to eat this unit for lunch, you would think. But it didn't because Draymond Green was good. Draymond Green 6'6". Herb Jones is 6'8" and is one of the best elite defenders in the NBA, hence him making the first team all defense last year. When you look at guys that he guarded last year, and some of these sample sizes are pretty small, he guarded everybody. Point guard, shooting guard, small forwards, power forwards, centers. Let's just look at big men and how he defended them. And this is actually great from the Pelicans because they have a website that really showed Herb Jones guarding key opposing players. So let's look at just bigs, right? By the way, he guarded DeJounte Murray last year for over 11 minutes. Murray went 2 of 10, had 2 turnovers and he blocked him twice. How happy does is Murray on the Pelicans now, not needing to deal with Herb Jones? So let's go through some of the players here. Lauri Markkanen, who's not a center, is more of a small forward, but 7 foot in size. 2 of 12. Let's keep going down the list to find some more big men here. Paolo Banchero, I saw on here. Went 3 of 8 against Herb Jones with 3 turnovers. This guy's basically a center, right? Let's keep going to some of these people. I just lost everyone on here, but it was there. Draymond Green, when he's kind of playing center, just didn't even take a shot against Herb Jones here. Bam Adebayo, one of the elite centers in the NBA, 0 for 3 against Herb Jones. Nikola Jokic went 1 of 3 with a turnover against Herb Jones. Julius Randle went 0 for 2 with a turnover, and Herb blocked him twice. Miles Turner, 0 for 1 against Herb Jones. He's proven that he can do this. He's proven that he can play that Draymond Green kind of role and guard opposing centers. Let him do it and see if it works. Maybe Trey's a little bit taller. Trey's closer to 6'10" in shoes. I don't know if he's ready for that kind of thing. But you can see how if Herb can do that, it makes this work, particularly then because you would have elite perimeter defense in Murray and Trey Murphy. So it requires Herb being able to guard centers and Trey taking a step forward defensively. Because then you can wreak havoc on the perimeter while not having, guys eat you up inside. And that's kind of the key, I think, to a lot of this lineup. But the makings of it are there, right? Everything I'm saying here makes perfect sense and shouldn't really come as a huge surprise. Can Herb Jones do this in a larger sample size? Remains to be seen, but it's definitely one of those things that if you're the coaching staff or others, you should probably think about at least trying to do that. Because if he does it well, and there's no reason to think he can't, right? Kind of based on what we've seen, it unlocks a lineup that maybe means you can play it significant minutes. So how many minutes can you play this lineup? And here's the other thing. Rebounding. What do you do about that? We talked a little bit about it yesterday. Let's talk about it more and kind of start to wrap up the discussion around a death lineup coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, but today we got something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, so you're running out of time, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game, and all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. You need some help with some of the bets? Anything Saints-related sounds good. The over on their win total right now, maybe some MVP odds for Derek Carr, for Alvin Kamara. Can Clint Kubiak win like assistant coach of the year? Or if you want to get in on the Pelicans, the opening night line is there. -5 against the Chicago Bulls. And I'm feeling pretty good about the Pelicans going into the season. So to get in on the action, all you got to do is just go to FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well, and become an everydayer so you listen to every show. And we got a great week's worth of shows for you. I'm looking forward to it. We're back to 5 days a week here. Now for your second listen, Locked On Saints. I mean, you watched the Dallas game, right? That was pretty incredible. Are the Saints back? Can we say that? Can we start to ask that question? The game against the Panthers is like, okay, it's the Panthers, but that game against the Cowboys on the road was eye-opening. Ross Jackson, host of Locked On Saints, going to make sense of everything black and gold with the offense and all of that. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Make Locked On Saints your second listen today, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's start to wrap up as we talk about the Pelicans version of the death lineup. And I see the similarities and the parallels between that Golden State Warriors lineup. And look, it's not as good as the Warriors lineup. These players aren't individually as good, as elite at probably anything other than maybe defense from Herb Jones as that Golden State Warriors lineup. But there's space for Zion to kill it offensively, and you put shooters around him. They're going to have space. Take your threes, make your threes. It all feeds in on itself offensively. Everyone's kind of a threat with that unit that we put out there. Defensively, Herb Jones, I think, can play the Draymond Green role. And if Trey takes a step forward to being an above-average defender, him and Murray can cause some havoc on the perimeter, and they can get out and run. And that's what they're going to be looking to do in this lineup. You know, one of the things that we talked about literally yesterday when we looked at defensive rebounding for the Pelicans is one of the big uncertainties unknown. They're going to need a team rebound on the defensive side of the ball with this. You know, one of the weaknesses, the main weakness of that Warriors death lineup was they were not a good defensive rebounding unit. Now, they did a good job of not allowing those easy putbacks, right? It's one thing to miss a shot, immediately get it, and just put it back in. You may as well have just made the shot in the first place, kind of. You know, the Pelicans did a good job of not allowing tons and tons of putbacks last year. They gave up second chance points, but they made those offenses work for it. It's tough to defend for 2-3 kind of possessions when they grab offensive rebounds. Eventually, the offense is likely going to win out. If you team rebound instead of just trying to get out in transition and run, I think you'll be okay. There's size in this lineup, right? You know, when you look at that, Ingram is tall. Zion is 6'6", right? Ingram is 6'8". Herb Jones is 6'8". Murray is how tall, but has good size for the guard position. He's 6'5". And then Zion 6'6". Trey is 6'10". There's size there. You can team rebound and grab those boards. But then when you force turnovers, basically everyone here can get out and run. You strategically play fast, running basically just off steals and turnovers. You don't need to try and do it off of defensive rebounds. Instead, go secure that rebound and then play in the half court. It'll be fine. That's why you throw this lineup out there that it should kill in the half court. But Murray, if he forces steal can get out and run and score. Herb Jones can do that. Trey can do that. Zion can do that. Ingram can do that. Everyone can literally get out and run. So you do this strategically, basically only off of a steal. It should work. So overall, how many minutes can you play this group? And I think that's the big question. You know, the Golden State Warriors did not start this. They started a traditional center. The first version of this with Harrison Barnes, they started Andrew Bogut. I think they went to Zaza Pachulia later, Kevon Looney at other times. They started a traditional center. You know, if the Pelicans feel they can only use this strategically to close games, I think it's fine. But I do think it's maybe worth trying to go out there and start games with it, right? If you go and take out one of these players, pick which one it is. Murray, Ingram, Herb, Trey, Zion, and it's likely going to be Herb or Trey here. Murray, Ingram, and Zion are going to be entrenched as starters. To put in a starting center, it just feels like a downgrade in talent. And for a team that didn't have their starters winning minutes last year, it was the bench that was doing that. You can't win that won't work in the playoffs. We saw that, right? It can work in the regular season beating up on opponents' benches, but you also do need to just win. The starters need to win your minutes because they're playing the majority of minutes. And then when you get into the postseason, when rotations are shortened, you need your starters to do it. This feels like the best way to maximize it. If they can find a way to rebound, I think they'll be good. I think they can defend. I think they can defend with the way Herb Jones plays, with Murray being added in there, right? We haven't even talked CJ McCollum here because you need that defense from Murray while also getting enough of his offense, and I think he can provide that. He's going to get a lot of wide open looks from three, and if he can knock those down, this team's going to be in a really good position and better than they were a year ago. And I think you're going to maybe see a bit out of a breakout year, if you can call it that, for DeJounte Murray, a guy who almost averaged, by the way, you know, back in the 2021-2022 season, a triple-double, 21 points, 9.2 assists, and 8.3 rebounds. Came really close to that. He was an all-star, finished second in most improved that year. He's going to be able to kind of have a bit of a resurgence. The points per game might not be up there, but I think you're going to see a pretty good three-point shooting season from him. 7 attempts last year at 36%. 36 is average. If that can get closer to 40 on that same amount of attempts, I think he's going to be in a really good position to do some damage to opponents and fit exactly what New Orleans wants to do. Look, they're not as good as the Warriors' death lineup is, but you see the vision. You see the vision. It relies on guys taking a little bit of a step forward, one or two unknowns with it, but I think the potential is there. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. So tomorrow we're going to look more at the defense. Can they run more? Maybe. You know, what do you do if you have a center out there versus not? We'll look at all of that. And then we're going to get into 3 wild things that I'm going to make, like 3 kind of bold predictions that could or maybe not happen, but are in the realm of possibility. Then Friday, we'll look at some award discussions. Who from the Pelicans is most likely to win something? That's going to be coming up the rest of the week here on Locked On Pelicans for the Everydayers. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. I appreciate y'all so much for listening. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.